Welcome to Stephen River podcast. Today we've got Andrew Morgan, solicitor in our private client department, who specialises in wills, trusts and IHT, and Wayne Griffiths, director of One Financial and
Morning.
IFAs that we work very closely with. So today's podcast is all about inheritance tax. It might be a good place to start, Andy, if you just explain what inheritance tax is.
Yeah, absolutely. So inheritance tax is a tax, obviously, on inheritance. It covers literally everything that you own. So whether that's property, cash, personal possessions, basically when you die, everything you own all gets aggregated together. And generally individuals have a threshold of £325,000 as of today. Within that limit, you can leave assets tax-free. Anything above that, typically you've got a starting rate of 40% tax. So obviously it's a tax which is affecting more and more people now as property prices increase, particularly in the region we're in. And so we're seeing more and more people come within the band of inheritance tax. So it's something which
One of those taxes they call voluntary, though, isn't it? Because there's quite a bit you could do to sort of help.
Lots you can do, and lots of things change over the years. So the things that will apply from years ago that may no longer apply. There are things that may change in the upcoming budget. And there are things that we get told from people down the pub or over the fence that have been told over and over and over again, and those things become fact when actually you should sit with a professional, guys like yourselves, that actually can give them the current legislation. There are things you can do, trusts. I mean, we start with the basics. Wills, power of attorney, they're like a given, they're really important to do. But yeah, things like trusts, giving money away, I'm a big fan of that. If you're not above the inheritance tax threshold, you don't have a problem.
Yep.
So give the money away, spend it, live for the 7 years, and then we don't have a problem.
Yeah, and I think actually Wayne makes a very good point there about the people down the pub. We hear a lot of misconceptions, and people that
common
come to
law
us.
wife is always
Common law wife is a good one, which we hear a lot, and people assume if you don't have a will, well, it will all go to my partner because I've lived with them for 10 years, and that's not a thing. There is no legal recognition of a common law spouse, and as you mentioned, a trust as well. A lot of people don't understand trusts. It has a legal definition. They are quite, they can be fairly complex mechanisms, and people, it's very important people don't try, and I've seen this before in homemade wills, try and sort of cobble together their own trust. There's so many pitfalls. It's really important that you take proper professional advice and do it properly so it has the effect that you're intending.
So when someone comes to see you and they have an estate over 325,000, is this sort of a process that you go through with them?
Yeah, the most important thing we try to understand is their current assets and what their assets are going to look like in the future. We need to understand their residency and domiciliary, because that's changed over the years. I mean, I've been doing this 31 years, go back many years ago. We generally take the domicile of our father's place of birth, and then it became you could change it if you were doing 17 out of 20 years. That's currently 15 out of 20, but we're going to be, if we're led to believe with the budget, we're going to be moving to a residency basis where if you are in the country for 10 years, your domicile. We have no idea until we actually get the legislation. But the reason that's important is that if you are a UK domicile, inheritance tax is payable on your worldwide assets. Right. So really important where we determine where your domiciliary is. If you're non-UK domicile, then it's only taxed on your UK assets. So using all your allowances is really important. So residential property nil rate band is important. It's really important for people. The legislation changed again a few years ago, where if you're a husband and wife and you now inherit the nil rate band, so potentially people come to us and their friend over the garden fence or their friend down the pub has said, you've got more than £325,000, you're going to pay 40% tax. And we can sit in that meeting and go, well, actually, you're under £1 million. And because you've got wills and because you've got everything set up, potentially you won't have inheritance tax. So making sure they have wills, making sure they have the power of attorneys, making sure we understand from day one their assets, is really, really, really important. And things like inheritance tax goes hand in hand with, nursing home fees in future life and stuff like that. So it's a real big area that you should focus on as early as you can in life.
Yeah. Is that something you would advocate?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, I can see it from the other side sometimes. So we see if someone will come to us and a spouse has possibly had a stroke or something, they're in hospital, it's too late then. If you don't have the capacity, except in very limited circumstances, you can't make a will. And it's kind of should, woulda, coulda. At that point, it's too late. So the earlier you can do it, the more options you have. Also, I think we touched on sort of the 7-year rule. So generally with gifting, if you live for 7 years, it's outside your estate. So the earlier you can look at doing that, obviously the better. No one knows how long they've got. And particularly if you're looking at trust, that becomes even more relevant as the 7 years. So it's always a general rule. You're never too young to look at tax planning. And the earlier you look at it, the more options generally you have open to you as well.
Yeah. There's some specific rules about gifting out of income as well, isn't there?
There are, and that's one in particular you want to get professional advice on, because it is very specific, but it's also one that's not very well known, and it's commonly used, for example, paying school fees for grandchildren, something like that. It can be used also to pay premiums on insurance policies, which I know is something that you would advise on, and then the insurance can be used to pay off some of your inheritance tax bill, for example.
And is that because you make a declaration of wishes or something?
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, touching on that, I think it's one of the least contentious ways of, reducing your estate and inheritance tax. Trust law, you guys have to deal with it all the time. I think someone gave me some figures this morning, is that trust law changes on average every 4 years. So, you guys are constantly having to do with that. 31 years ago, we learnt about writing a joint life, second death, whole life policy in trust to help out with inheritance tax. That's still there, still works. It's the fundamentals to most things. It's the one that seems to change the least. So it's really, really important. But the trust has to be set up correctly around that life insurance policy and the beneficiaries and the trustees. And there are errors that we see all the time. You might see people putting their parents down as trustees on a life insurance policy or a trust. It's like, well, you're hoping that generally they're going to die before you.
Likely will come back into their estate and then back into yours potentially.
Yeah, potentially. So it's things like that are vital. There's misconceptions around inheritance tax on pension funds, whether that's going to apply in the future, whether it isn't going to apply. Age of 75, what happens when you're within a pension fund? So I think sitting down with a solicitor, 100%. Wills, power of attorney, have a chat as early as you can. The financial advisor will always work with the solicitor. We're never like opposite to you guys. We sit with you as a team going, what works? These are the ideas that work. And I've always been told, if it sounds too good to be true, it normally is. So sit with a professional that can go, this is work. We do this over and over again. This is the fundamental to financial planning and to estate planning.
Yeah.
What other things have we covered in wills?
In wills, I mean, it's important to look at things. If you've got children, you want to name a guardian. If you've got children under 18, what would happen to them if something happened to you and the other parent? Obviously, you might want to look at charity giving, anything like that, any assets to anyone else. In particular, we mentioned common law wife or spouse earlier, so it's very important. If you're not married, it's really important you leave anything that you want to leave to them, because they won't get anything without a will. We also talked about trust before. There's all sorts of options around life interest trust, things like that. If you want to look at planning for future generations, or possibly if you're from a blended family, so if you've got children from different relationships, there are things you can do to protect the spouse, whilst also ensuring that your respective children receive your share of the estate as well. So to make sure sort of everyone is covered in that sense.
And then probably the most important thing people think about is care home fees as well. Now, is that something you can buy policies to help cover?
Yeah, so it's becoming exceptionally popular again. Immediate care annuities, immediate needs annuities, they're very, they're the same thing. But care home fees are really important to start focusing on, because quite often we see the people that come to us that mum or dad or both are already in a care home. The ultimate beneficiaries of the will are also the people with the power of attorney. The money that the parents have it's there to give them the best care home, the best care in later life.
It's often quite locked up in the property as well.
But it's
isn't it?
always locked. Yeah, quite often it's locked up in the property, and a lot of people aren't property managers, but there's sentimental reasons and love for that property. They might have grown up in that property, and sometimes you need to sit down and go, okay, do we want that property to be sold by the local authority? Do we want a debt built up against that property by the local authority? Do we actually want that money, the property, to be sold and then used? But you then got the parents on the other side of it going, they don't really want much of their money going because they've worked all their life for all this money and they want it to go to the next generation. So sometimes when you take an annuity, the immediate care annuity, it takes any risk out of that equation. You go and buy this policy that says it will pay for the care home fees for X amount of period or for the rest of the life, index linked, and then what's left over can now be used. It could be used for gifts because you've taken the risk. If you don't use something like that, you're always sitting there going, you can't make gifts out of the estate gifts out of the current affairs because that money might be needed. And then people start leaving it in cash, which the last few years not been a problem with interest rates at over 5%. But if we get back down to interest rates of 1%, it's sitting there doing nothing.
It's actually decreased in value, isn't it? Yeah.
Correct. And then if you actually were still speaking to mum and dad will be talking about things like, my kids are working all the hours God sends, because of interest rates and things like that. We don't really want them to wait until we die to benefit from our money. So that whole inheritance tax is all about, can we make gifts now to benefit the next generation? Do they actually have to die for them to benefit?
Yeah.
Well, they don't. But we've also got to keep an eye on it. This is their money that they've saved to make sure that they have a great retirement and careful. And so that can't be done from your mate down the pub.
Yes, because another misconception often is, I just put my property into trust and then it doesn't go towards my care.
We hear that a lot, and it's either, I'll give my house to my kids now, and then it's problem solved. Now, obviously, the local authority weren't born yesterday. They've seen the tricks. It's not as simple as that. You can't just give everything to your kids now and then say I don't own anything. And we do see that, and often if people try and do that without taking advice, they can cause more problems for themselves, because that then flags it that you're trying to avoid care fees, and also if it comes to a potentially inheritance tax as well. So you get a double whammy. It causes all sorts of problems. It's not effective for either, generally speaking, unless you take the proper advice and set things up properly. We hear that a lot. That's a very common, heard it from friends that this is what you do.
It's fact, apparently. Now, we've heard it so many times. I've given my property away, but I'm still living there. And my argument to that was, well, if you gave it to me, I could rent that on the open market. And if I could rent it on the open market for £1,000 a month, £3,000 a month, £5,000 a month, then you should be paying me the rent for it. So are you paying the rent to your kids? No. Okay. So you've given it away, but you've reserved a benefit in carrying using it, that gift for reservation. HMRC are just going to go, no.
Yeah,
and then you start, getting, well, have you done it to deliberately, to lower your assets, deliberate deprivation of assets for care home fees? So are you going to get two people now coming to you going, you're doing something wrong? And that's all because it's been said over and over and over again. This is what we've done and we don't have a problem. And unfortunately, it's us that then picks up on it when the people are passed on, and they start waving
bad news.
They start waving this document around that they paid a fortune for years ago and go, unfortunately, that doesn't work.
No.
So it's, again, that legislation will change and change and change and change. So, I think it's always important that you don't just write a trust or a will and then leave it in a shoebox somewhere and go, that's going to work. You do need to keep taking ongoing advice about it.
Yeah. When would you recommend that to review?
In terms of reviews, we generally say, as a rule of thumb, every 5 years, as you want to be looking at your will. Obviously, there are others. If something major happens, if someone that you've named dies, or if you have a new grandchild, something you might want to include. Obviously, there's always events that can occur that cause you to review it, but certainly as a minimum, every 5 years, you want to have a look at it. By all means, give us a call, come in. It might be a case it's all fine, but it's better to check and know you don't need to change it than to just assume it's fine. I've had people come to me before with wills, and actually got married 5 years after the will, so it was revoked 20 years ago. They don't know about it, and they've had a completely invalid will for the last 20 years with no idea. So it's always worth any life events like that, or just periodically, because as you know, as I mentioned, the tax rules change all the time, and we don't know what's going to happen.
So you tend to see less change with power of attorney?
So, yeah, powers of attorney generally, the idea, they're called lasting powers of attorney for a reason. The idea is you shouldn't need to amend them, but obviously, in particular, that if something happened to one of your attorneys, that's particularly when you'd want to just check. We try to build in replacements, things like that, but you know, it's not perfect. So it's less urgent in terms of the law is unlikely to change to invalidate them. But certainly it's a good thing to consider at the same time as your will. So if you're reviewing your will, you can always, we would always do it as a matter of course. If you're reviewing the will, if you had a power of attorney, we get out and just check that it still reflects your wishes and it's still what you want.
I think the sad thing on that is that there's a misconception that it's for old people. When you get to retirement age, go and get a lasting power of attorney. That's really important. I truly believe that if you go and buy a house with someone, you should have it. So it could be whatever age. It's really, really important. Again, misconceptions that they are a fortune and things like that. You should set aside some money to take professional advice from you guys to go some wills, power of attorney done at the same time, and get it done correctly. Because the one thing I know is you try and do it yourself, any spelling mistakes, wrong colour pen. They don't like that sort of thing. So, it's important to actually, I think take advice on that and get it done properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, you're never too young. I think the common sort of idea is that you need a power of attorney when you're old and in a care home. Now, you could have a car accident and need a power of attorney, anything like that. We've seen this before. And if you don't have one,
so it doesn't just need to be a mental incapacity then.
No, it could be physical incapacity, mental incapacity, whatever reason that you can't manage your affairs anymore. And I think the alternative, if you don't have one, you have to go to the court, have a deputy appointed. It's much more expensive, much more difficult. Your family members have to take out an insurance bond, which you're paying for, to look after your own affairs. So if you have a power of attorney in place, all of that can be avoided. So it's far better to have it and not need it than to not have it and need it.
I was looking at it years ago. I mean, there used to be cases when, many, many years ago, you would, be buying a house and potentially the completion or the exchange may happen at the time you've gone on a holiday, and you'd leave your solicitor the power to actually sign the contracts on your behalf. It was as fundamental as something as simple as that. And I look at that as the basics of everything in that you go, do you need someone to sign for you on your behalf? It's a bit more technical than that, but that's the way I always look at it for clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got a great relationship with One Financial, and you are very kindly offering all of our clients a free financial review.
Yep. So
what does that include?
It sounds grand, doesn't it? So I always look at it and go, we are, most of the time, we're providing reassurance and a sense check. A lot of clients will come in and see us and say, I'm thinking about doing this. And they want to know, can they do it? Is it legal? Does it work? And that could be someone coming in and going, I've heard all about equity release. I've heard people telling me it's wonderful. I've heard people telling it's terrible. Can you just give us some guidance on that? And that could be an hour meeting, half an hour meeting, hour and a half. But we sit there and we can look at pensions, mortgages, life assurance. We can look at equity release. Everything that we can do for you is all about where are you now? Where do you want to be in the future? And is everything you've got, is it going to get you there? If it's not, then how do you change what you've got to help you get to where you want to be? Or the horrible ones, the what if scenarios, the what if something happened to you, have you got enough money to make sure everything's still fine? The nice what ifs, if we get to retirement, which we hope we do, have we got enough money to give us an income in retirement? But that's all about, sometimes it could be an hour and a half chat where people walk away from the meeting going, I feel really reassured, everything's in place, I've done everything. Sometimes it's not perfect and we go, can we change things? But yeah, that's completely at our cost, no obligation to do anything further, but it's just that sense check and reassurance.
Start that conversation as early as possible.
Yeah, we have clients. I mean, we've got clients that are doing junior ISAs from a really young age, so it's the parents that we're dealing with. But we've got some that are just coming out at 18 and they're sitting there going, what do I do with my money now? Because mum and dad are going, don't let them buy a car, don't let them buy a car. You know, so we do things like that. We do mortgages, so we're dealing with it whatever age. I have some lovely lifetime mortgage clients who are married and 99 years old. So, you know, we no matter what age, I would always say it's worth having a financial review. It's actually always worth sitting down with someone and saying, as simple as, should I go into my workplace pension scheme? You know, our answer is going to be yes, but they might come to us and say, but there's all these funds. What funds should I use? And that's really important because charges, you know, this is an 18-year-old, 20-year-old, charges and performance over a 50-year period are going to make a big difference. So things like that are really important. So we don't just go, oh, come and see us if you've got X amount of money in your X age. It can be for anyone.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.